It all started with what seemed like a simple idea, a logo change, something so ordinary in the corporate world that it often passes unnoticed. Companies refresh their branding all the time, sometimes to modernize, sometimes to appeal to younger audiences, sometimes simply to signal that they are moving into a new era. But when Cracker Barrel, a restaurant chain deeply woven into the fabric of American tradition, decided to unveil a sleek new logo, they quickly discovered that what looked like a harmless update was anything but. Almost overnight, a storm erupted. Customers who had spent decades dining under the glow of the old familiar sign felt as if something had been stolen from them. For many, the original Cracker Barrel logo wasn't just artwork. It was a time machine. It evoked road trips, rocking chairs on wide wooden porches, and family dinners where biscuits and gravy sat at the center of the table. People didn't see a logo, they saw memories. And when that symbol suddenly disappeared, replaced with something stripped down and modern, they didn't just shrug it off. They fought back. The backlash began on social media. Posts ridiculing the new design spread like wildfire. Some said it looked like the logo of a Silicon Valley startup. Others compared it to a bland grocery store generic brand. Memes mocked it relentlessly. What was meant to be a proud step into the future instead became a public joke. But this wasn't just harmless fun. Within hours, customers were voicing fury. Loyal patrons threatened boycotts. Families said they felt betrayed. The sentiment grew. Cracker Barrel was abandoning tradition, abandoning its heart, abandoning the very thing that made it special. The fury soon spilled over into the financial world. Investors watched with growing alarm as Cracker Barrel's stock price began to slide. In just a matter of days, the company shed nearly 12% of its value. For a chain that had weathered recessions, cultural changes, and even a pandemic, this was one of the sharpest drops it had faced in years, and all because of a logo. Analysts described it as a self-inflicted wound. The idea was simple. In trying to chase a modern look, the company had forgotten who it was. And then, just when it seemed the backlash couldn't grow louder, one voice cut through the noise. That voice belonged to Donald Trump. The president has always had a knack for inserting himself into cultural flashpoints, often turning minor controversies into national conversations. This time was no different. In a social media post, he declared that Cracker Barrel had made a big mistake changing its logo, and he urged the company to go back to what worked. He praised the old design as something loved by everyone and called on the chain to listen to its customers. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes, Trump's words were trending. His supporters amplified the message, arguing that once again he was standing up for tradition and common sense. His critics mocked him for wading into what they saw as a trivial issue. But love him or hate him, one thing was certain. Trump had changed the trajectory of the story. What had been a marketing blunder was now a political flashpoint. Cracker Barrel wasn't just facing angry customers. It was caught in the middle of a national debate. Behind closed doors, executives scrambled. Meetings stretched late into the night. The company's leadership had believed that the logo change was a small risk, a design refresh that would make them look modern without alienating their base. But now, the stakes had skyrocketed. They weren't just dealing with dissatisfied diners anymore. They were dealing with investors, the media, and the president of the United States himself. Every option was on the table. Should they defend the new logo and ride out the storm? Or should they admit defeat, abandon the change, and risk looking weak? The choice wasn't easy. On one hand, admitting failure could undermine confidence in the company's leadership. On the other, sticking with the new logo could lead to an even greater financial collapse. And hovering over it all was the weight of tradition. The reality that customers weren't just upset about design. They were upset about identity. For decades, Cracker Barrel had presented itself as a safe harbor of the old-fashioned. Its slogan promised an old country store. Its dining rooms offered nostalgia on every wall. How could the company maintain that identity if it rejected the very symbol that represented it? As the backlash intensified, Cracker Barrel tried small gestures to calm the waters. Spokespeople said they valued customer feedback. They hinted that the new logo was part of an evolving journey. But none of it worked. Customers weren't interested in journeys. They wanted the old logo back. Anything less felt like betrayal. The breaking point came just days later. Trump doubled down with a second message. This time, not just criticizing the company, but flatly urging them to do the right thing. This, combined with the relentless mockery online and the financial downturn, left the company with little choice. Executives voted to reverse course. The old logo, they announced, would return. The decision was packaged in careful corporate language, emphasizing that they had listened to the people. But beneath the polished words was a clear reality. Cracker Barrel had caved. And the reaction? Immediate celebration. Customers cheered online, posting memories of family meals under the familiar sign. Investors breathed a sigh of relief as the stock rebounded. Hashtags like hashtag Save the Barrel and hashtag Old Logo Forever surged across social platforms. What had been a humiliating disaster transformed almost instantly into a story of redemption. But the questions remained. How had a simple logo change spiraled so quickly into chaos? Why did customers react with such fury? And what role had Trump really played in the decision? For Cracker Barrel, the saga was far from over. The old logo might have returned, but the deeper story about tradition, branding, and the collision of business and politics was only just beginning. The dust may have settled on Cracker Barrel's decision to revert back to its old logo, but in many ways, the real story was just beginning. Because what happened here wasn't simply a case of a company making a bad marketing choice. It was something deeper. It was a window into America's complicated relationship with tradition, politics, and identity. And when you look closer, the layers of this controversy reveal much more than a sign hanging outside a restaurant. For decades, Cracker Barrel has carved out a place in American life that few chains could ever claim. It wasn't just about the food, though comfort dishes like chicken and dumplings or the hash brown casserole earned their own cult followings. It was about the feeling. From the moment you stepped into one of their restaurants, you were transported. Wooden rocking chairs out front, a crackling fireplace inside, shelves stacked with candy, games, and old-fashioned toys. Every detail whispered of a simpler time. For many families, it was a tradition. Road trips weren't complete without a stop at Cracker Barrel. Sunday after church often meant gathering at those wooden tables. It became a brand built as much on nostalgia as on food. That is why the logo mattered so much. It wasn't just design. It was the banner under which all those memories lived. When executives tried to modernize it, customers felt as if they were losing more than a graphic. They felt like they were losing the soul of the place. And this is why the backlash wasn't mild or polite. It was raw. It was personal. People who had grown up with Cracker Barrel saw the change as an erasure of their past, and they refused to accept it. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. This wasn't just a consumer revolt. It became political theater. When President Trump jumped into the fray, he didn't just comment on a restaurant chain. He turned the controversy into a cultural battlefield. On one side, people rallied around the idea of tradition, preservation, and respect for history. On the other side, critics argued that focusing on something like a restaurant logo was a distraction from bigger national issues. But whether you agreed with him or not, Trump's involvement gave the story legs. Suddenly, this wasn't just about Cracker Barrel. It was about America itself. The reaction proved that in today's world, everything is political, even a restaurant's branding. Trump's post electrified his supporters, who saw him as defending tradition once again. They filled comment sections with praise, urging Cracker Barrel to listen. Meanwhile, his opponents mocked the move, saying it was ridiculous to spend political capital on a logo. Yet, ironically, those very criticisms only fueled the fire, keeping the debate alive for days, then weeks. Inside Cracker Barrel headquarters, this political twist made the situation infinitely more complex. Corporate leaders were now navigating not only the anger of their customers and investors, but also the glare of national politics. If they resisted, they risked alienating a president and millions of his supporters. If they gave in, they risked appearing weak and indecisive. But in truth, the decision had already been made for them. The wave of outrage had simply grown too large. When the company announced that the old logo would return, the relief was palpable. But so was the curiosity. Because while the immediate crisis seemed resolved, everyone wanted to know, how did this even happen? How did a major national chain, with all its resources and research, fail to anticipate this kind of backlash? The answer, according to insiders, lies in a clash between generations. You see, Cracker Barrel's leadership had been trying for years to find ways to connect with younger diners. Millennials and Gen Z have vastly different expectations for restaurants. They want modern design. They want digital ordering options. They want brands that look current, not old-fashioned. Executives believed that by updating the logo, they were making a step in that direction. They thought they could gently nudge the brand into a new era without losing their loyal base. But what they underestimated was just how emotionally attached that base really was. They didn't just want food. They wanted familiarity. They wanted stability. They wanted the very opposite of change. The failure exposed something that many companies have been learning the hard way. Nostalgia is powerful, and when you try to tamper with it, you risk more than a few angry tweets. You risk igniting a movement. Look at what happened to brands like Tropicana, which once changed its iconic orange juice packaging only to be forced to switch back after furious customers revolted. Or the infamous new Coke debacle, when Coca-Cola's attempt to modernize their recipe backfired so badly that they had to reintroduce Coca-Cola Classic just months later. Cracker Barrel's logo disaster now sits comfortably among these branding missteps, but with a twist. Because this time, the story didn't just play out in the business pages. It played out in the White House. What this means for the future of Cracker Barrel is complicated. On the one hand, they've restored faith among their most loyal customers. Bringing back the old logo was a victory for tradition, and people will remember that. On the other hand, the chain is left with a scar. They can't move forward without remembering the risk of alienating their base. Any future changes, even small ones, will now be watched closely, dissected, and judged against this moment. It has become a case study, not just in branding, but in how corporations operate in the age of hyperpoliticization. For Trump, the saga has become another example of his ability to dominate the cultural conversation. In a world filled with complex policy debates and global issues, he managed to shine a spotlight on something as seemingly trivial as a restaurant sign. And in doing so, he reshaped the narrative entirely. Supporters argue that this shows his instinct for connecting with ordinary people. Critics argue it shows his instinct for distraction. But either way, it shows his instinct for impact. And in the end, that impact changed the course of Cracker Barrel's history. The story may sound like it's over, but in reality, it's only the beginning. Because now the real test lies ahead. Will Cracker Barrel's old logo truly satisfy customers for the long haul? Or has this controversy awakened a new scrutiny of every decision the company makes? Will other brands take note, fearful of repeating the same mistake? And most of all, will Trump's involvement embolden more companies to make decisions based on politics, rather than just business? These questions remain unanswered. For now, though, what's clear is that a restaurant logo has become a symbol of something much larger. It's become a symbol of how America wrestles with change, how nostalgia fuels identity, and how even the smallest cultural decisions can trigger national debates. The logo may be back, the fires may have quieted, but the ripples are still spreading. And if you think this story is finished, just wait. The next chapter is coming. When Cracker Barrel announced it was reverting to its old logo, you might think that would have been the end of the story. Decision made, customer satisfied, case closed. But if we've learned anything from modern media and politics, it's that nothing ever truly ends when the cameras are still rolling, when social feeds are still buzzing, and when the story still has energy left to burn, because what happened next wasn't quiet acceptance. It was the beginning of a new narrative, one that stretched far beyond the restaurant chain itself. What started as a branding blunder transformed into a nationwide conversation about authenticity, trust, and the strange power of nostalgia in shaping our choices. And Cracker Barrel, whether they wanted it or not, was now at the center of it all. Across the country, people started sharing their own Cracker Barrel stories. Families dug out old photos taken on road trips, posing on those iconic rocking chairs. Couples remembered first dates. Grandparents reminisced about taking their grandkids to the gift shop to pick out candy sticks or wooden puzzles. The company had tapped into a vein of memory so rich and so deep that it surprised even them. For every angry post that once demanded the logo come back, there were now heartfelt posts celebrating its return. Cracker Barrel wasn't just winning back customers. It was suddenly riding a wave of cultural relevance. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The media couldn't resist. News outlets ran endless coverage, not just about the logo itself, but about what it meant. Talk shows debated whether America had become too obsessed with nostalgia. Pundits argued about whether this was a political win for Trump or just a coincidence that he had attached himself to the story. Some analysts even went further, suggesting this could mark a turning point in how corporations deal with cultural backlash. The story grew legs because it wasn't just about Cracker Barrel anymore. It was about who we are and what we value. And inside corporate America, people were watching closely. You could almost feel the unease in boardrooms across the country. Marketing executives at other brands were whispering to each other, could this happen to us? Every logo, every tagline, every attempt at modernization suddenly felt riskier. Cracker Barrel had set an example, not because of how bold their rebrand was, but because of how spectacularly it backfired. And once politics got involved, the stakes grew even higher. This is what made the story so sticky. Because think about it. How often does a restaurant chain's logo redesign land in the political spotlight? How often does it inspire millions of social media posts, heated debates, and even presidential commentary? It was the perfect storm. Nostalgia, politics, branding, and social media all colliding. And the result was something no one could have predicted. Meanwhile, Trump himself continued to stoke the fire. He mentioned the Cracker Barrel controversy at rallies, weaving it into his broader message of protecting tradition and standing against what he often calls pointless modern changes. The crowd loved it. They roared in approval, chanting, clapping, even laughing at the absurdity of it all. For them, it was more than just a logo. It was a symbol of standing up to cultural drift, of saying no to change for the sake of change. And for Trump, it was another opportunity to frame himself as the defender of the real America. But critics weren't silent either. They mocked the idea that a president would spend time on something as small as a restaurant logo when so many bigger issues loomed. They painted it as a distraction tactic, a way to dominate headlines while avoiding more complex challenges. Some late-night comedians turned it into punchlines, joking about future presidential interventions in things like cereal box designs or soda flavors. Yet, ironically, every joke, every criticism, every mocking headline only made the story last longer. It gave it oxygen. And as long as people were talking, Trump was winning. Cracker Barrel's executives, for their part, leaned into the chaos in a subtle way. They began posting more about their heritage, highlighting the company's history in advertising campaigns. They leaned on storytelling, showing old photos from their early restaurants, emphasizing their identity as a family-oriented, traditional brand. They didn't directly mention Trump or politics, but they didn't have to. By doubling down on nostalgia, they positioned themselves as the safe haven for tradition in a world that often feels like it's moving too fast. And customers responded. Sales data in the weeks after the announcement showed a noticeable bump. Some analysts argued it was just curiosity, people drawn in by the headlines who wanted to see what the fuss was about. But others suggested something deeper. That Cracker Barrel, by restoring its old logo, had reignited a bond with its most loyal fans, reminding them why they love the brand in the first place. In a competitive restaurant market, that kind of loyalty is priceless, but there's still a risk, because nostalgia cuts both ways. While it can rally people, it can also trap a brand in the past. The very audience that celebrates tradition can also resist any form of progress. And for a chain like Cracker Barrel, which still needs to grow and attract younger diners, that tension isn't going away. The question becomes, how do you honor the past without being stuck in it? How do you evolve without alienating the people who brought you here? And that's why this story refuses to fade. Because at its heart, it's not just about one logo or one company. It's about the balance every brand, every politician, and even every person faces between change and tradition, between innovation and nostalgia, between who we were and who we're becoming. Cracker Barrel just happened to be the stage where that battle played out for all of us to see. For the moment, the rocking chairs are still out front. The fireplace still glows. The old logo hangs proudly once again, a symbol of victory for some, a symbol of surrender for others. But beneath the surface, the story is still evolving. What happens when Cracker Barrel makes its next big move? Will customers be forgiving? Or will every change now be met with suspicion? And will Trump continue to use the saga as part of his broader narrative of tradition versus change? One thing is certain. This isn't just a Cracker Barrel story anymore. It's an American story. A story about how deeply we cling to the familiar, how fiercely we react to even the smallest perceived threats to it, and how, in today's world, no brand decision is ever just business. It's culture, it's politics, it's identity, and in this case, it's all of those things tied up in one unforgettable moment. When the dust began to settle, you'd expect the Cracker Barrel logo saga to quietly fade away. But instead, it lingered. It lingered on social media timelines, it lingered in dinner table conversations, and it lingered in boardrooms across the country. The truth is, the story had become too big to just disappear. It had taken on a life of its own, and that life was fueled by the powerful cocktail of nostalgia, politics, and culture that Americans can't seem to resist. Everywhere you looked, someone had an opinion. Some swore the logo change, and its reversal was proof that ordinary people still held power, that corporations had to listen when their customers pushed back. Others saw it as a troubling reminder of how easily outrage, sometimes manufactured outrage, could dictate corporate strategy. And then there were those who simply shrugged and said, it's just a logo. But deep down, even those voices knew it wasn't just a logo anymore. It was a symbol. The moment Trump stepped into the story, the stakes changed. What began as a business decision became a political lightning rod. His voice amplified the backlash, made it louder, sharper, and far more visible. For his supporters, this was another chapter in his ongoing crusade to defend tradition, to stand up for the way things used to be. For his critics, it was a distraction, a gimmick, another example of him inserting himself into a story for attention. But whether you loved him or hated him, you couldn't escape the fact that his involvement turned the Cracker Barrel logo into a national issue. And that's the part that fascinates so many observers. Think about it. How often does the President of the United States get involved in a restaurant's branding decision? It's absurd. It's surreal. But it's also a perfect reflection of the times we live in. We live in a world where culture wars can ignite from the smallest sparks, where the tiniest change to a company's logo can suddenly symbolize something far bigger than itself. And the Cracker Barrel saga proved that no brand is immune to becoming a battlefield. But let's not forget the human side of this story. For many customers, Cracker Barrel isn't just a restaurant. It's memory. It's comfort. It's family road trips, hot biscuits, and hours spent browsing the quirky gift shop. It's grandparents teaching their grandkids how to play checkers by the fire. And when that logo was changed, it felt like more than a design tweak. It felt like a piece of that memory was being erased. That's why people reacted so strongly. Because nostalgia isn't just emotional, it's powerful. It shapes how we feel, what we buy, even who we vote for. Inside the company, though, this was more than nostalgia. It was survival. When the backlash exploded, when Trump himself weighed in, Cracker Barrel had two choices: dig in their heels and defend the change, or admit the mistake and reverse it. They chose the latter. And in doing so, they not only regained customer trust, they turned what could have been a permanent brand scar into a story of redemption. By going back to the old logo, they sent a signal: we hear you. We get it. We're not going to abandon what made us who we are. That decision came with rewards. Sales rose, loyalty strengthened, and suddenly Cracker Barrel was no longer the butt of the joke. It was the center of a cultural win. But also came with risks. Because now, every move they make will be watched more closely. Every change will be judged against this moment. And every attempt to modernize could be seen as another betrayal. It's the paradox of nostalgia. It saves you, but it can also trap you. Meanwhile, Trump continues to use the story to his advantage. He's mentioned it in rallies, interviews, even offhand remarks, always painting it as an example of common sense winning out. For him, it's not about the logo itself. It's about the narrative. The narrative that he stood with the people, that he pressured a major company into listening, and that he was once again the defender of tradition. Whether you believe that's true or not doesn't matter. What matters is the story sticks. And in politics, that's everything where does this all leave us? It leaves us with a story that began as a minor rebranding decision and ended as a cultural landmark. A story that taught corporations just how risky it is to underestimate their customers. A story that reminded us how nostalgia can be weaponized. And a story that, perhaps most importantly, showed us that in today's world, there is no such thing as just a logo. Every image, every word, every symbol can be loaded with meaning, amplified by politics, and transformed by the power of social media. And yet, beneath all of the noise, there's a quieter lesson here too. Maybe what people really want isn't complicated. Maybe they just want familiarity. Maybe they just want to feel like some things don't change, even when the world around them is moving faster and faster. Maybe in some strange way, the old Cracker Barrel logo became a symbol of stability. A reminder that not everything has to be reinvented. You sit with that thought. Consider this. Cracker Barrel didn't just go back to a logo. They went back to the heart of what people loved about them. And in doing so, they reminded us all of something important. Change isn't always progress. Sometimes progress is knowing when to stop, when to listen, and when to say, you know what? The old way works just fine. And that's why this story will live on long after the headlines fade. Because it wasn't just about a restaurant. It was about culture, about memory, about identity, about politics, about the push and pull between past and future. Cracker Barrel happened to be the stage. But the play? The play is all of US.SO. What do you think? Was this a victory for tradition or just another example of outrage culture winning out? Do you believe Trump was truly the deciding factor, or was this a decision Cracker Barrel was going to make anyway? And most importantly, does this change how you see the brand? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you found this story as fascinating as I did, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that dive deep into the moments shaping our culture. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.